Bullshit.
To confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe.
Dipshit.
So you are doubling down on your comments earlier, ignore the law.
And bad shit. These are the interesting times. Hello everyone, my name's Matt Johnston and welcome to The Interesting Times, a comedy show that looks and laughs at UK politics. Rishi Sunak has hit a brick wall. Don't start celebrating, it's a metaphorical brick wall with his plan to send refugees to Rwanda. If only he had a lawyer on board, or at least one that knew what they were talking about. So, quick recap. Last Thursday, the Supreme Court ruled against Sunak's plan to put refugees on a plane and take them to Rwanda, deeming Rwanda unsafe. And honestly, that is so racist.
Okay, I'm not familiar with her work. I'm not going to debate that. I'm not suggesting the author that you're quoting does this, but I have detected basically some very lazy attitudes because it is an African country.
That was the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, who, unlike his predecessor, isn't a lawyer. But James was keen to show he understood the legal mind at work.
This is what Lord Sumption said. He was speaking to us for the Today podcast.
For Parliament simply to say the facts are different would be constitutionally really quite extraordinary.
Well, look, find me two lawyers and I'll give you three opinions. The point being...
What an extraordinary thing to say about Jonathan Sumption, who's not known to be an opponent of some of your views.
No, he's right. Suella Braverman, who is a lawyer and thought the Rwanda plan was brilliant.
I would love to be having a front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda. That's my dream.
Then she thought it was batshit.
If we lose in the Supreme Court, you will have wasted a year. Your magical thinking has meant you have failed to prepare any sort of credible Plan B.
Abra Rwanda. And that the policy wasn't going to work and also might work.
When the Supreme Court judgment, which is so critical, he thinks, to his fortunes, comes tomorrow on whether the government's allowed to send asylum seekers back to Rwanda, she's saying, well, if you win it, you haven't made proper provision for it to work properly. If you lose it, well, I told you so.
James, by all accounts, wasn't a fan of the Rwanda scheme, until he had to back it.
Shadow Home Secretary has gone on the record to say that you said to her that the government's Rwanda policy was batshit.
Well, look, I don't recognise.
Did you say that?
I don't recognise that phrase.
Yesterday in the Commons, you were accused of describing the Rwanda system as batshit. Is that true? Did you say those words?
Well, look, I'm not. That was a claim made of me.
I don't remember saying any of that, but I'm sure if I did, I meant it as a good thing. Bats have incredible senses, so can hear things happening miles away and prepare far in advance, a bit like we have the Rwanda scheme. And they can fly and emigrate across continents, a bit like the Rwanda scheme, which is shit, like the batshit in the Rwanda scheme. Lee Anderson also isn't a lawyer. To be frank, he barely qualifies as a mammal.
I want people in this country to respect our history.
Respect our history!
Our traditions, our
What about our law? What about our laws?
Yeah.
When you go to bed at night time, Matthew, you've got a kid. I bet the last thing you do before you go to bed is lock your door, put your alarm on and make sure that nobody can enter your property.
When I go to
and
bed
it should
at
be
night,
the same
I do
with
that.
our borders.
When I go to...
Unless you're homeless, in which case they just take away your tent. But what does unelected Prime Minister, a man hoping to be in long trousers before the next election, Rishi Sunak, think?
I do not agree with this decision, but I respect it and accept it.
He doesn't, and he doesn't. Rishi Sunak is now going to attempt to pass emergency legislation to get a law passed to say that Rwanda is a safe country. Because when the facts change, then you must change your approach. And if you can't change your approach, change the facts.
I said I was going to fundamentally change our country, and I meant it. So I'm also announcing today that we will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation.
Yep, that is the unelected head of the country talking about changing the direction of this country to force courts to accept legislation he will impose on them and standing in front of two giant union flags as he does so. Nervous yet? And if the answer to that is no, a follow-up question. Can I live with you in your country? But don't worry, we're not going to leave the ECHR, are we?
Where I hope Sunak doesn't go is down the route of ECHR withdrawal altogether.
So Suella Braverman has today said that this is magical thinking unless you explicitly say that you are withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights. She's right about that.
Well, pulling out is something that you'd want to be talking to colleagues about.
We'll be looking at all the options, one step at a time, one step at a time.
One step at a time. What a lovely, non-wokey, common sense attitude to, frankly, an insanely complex issue. She's already earned her salary as far as I'm concerned. Yes, one goose step at a time, backs to the grindstone, is letterbox and dicks in pigs. And you've got to be careful. You don't know what you might be stepping into. So, step one, get the legislation done to say Rwanda is safe. Right?
When's that going to happen?
Well, look, we are
Prime Minister
working.
Wouldn't say yesterday.
Look, what I don't want to do is I don't want to pick a date where I can't give that degree of certainty. But
OK, so maybe it is or it will be. Then present to the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Now, the House of Lords can't reject something that was in the government's manifesto, except this wasn't in the government's manifesto in 2019. They actually promised to continue to accept refugees as required by international law. So the Lords will either reject it or maybe sit on it for a bit. I mean, the Lords is not known for speed, so what you really need is some top-level Tories in the Lords who are going to be sympathetic to this to be able to push this through. Well played. Take that, democracy, common decency and international law. So legislation gets put in. If it gets rejected by the House of Lords, call them a bunch of out-of-touch dinosaurs or enemy of the people. Suella would have been perfect for that. See what Lee Anderson's doing later. If they do pass it, then take it back to the judges and tell them all that we've got a new set of laws for them to follow. And this is the will of the British people. I mean Parliament, which was elected by the British people. I mean the government, which wasn't elected by the British people. Let's just try and avoid that whole British people thing. The next step is to then get it past the Strasbourg courts. And if we don't...
As well as looking at our legal framework here in the United Kingdom, will the Home Secretary be willing to disapply international treaties and conventions such as the ECHR and Refugee Convention in order to take back control of our borders, yes or no?
I don't believe those things are necessary.
Well...
But we may also need to consider, if that is not legally viable, withdrawal from the ECHR.
Maybe.
Is the government prepared to leave the European Convention of Human Rights?
The essay question.
No, I'm not asking about the essay question.
Well, no, because
I'm asking about a specific, because I'll be honest, I feel like we've been getting a bit of ankle flashing, to be honest.
Yes, come on, Robert, get your writs out for the lads. The trouble is, it's not just the Strasbourg court the Tories have to contend with. There's also the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the United Nations Convention Against Torture, and the United Nations International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Blimey, these humans have got more rights than I have. But anyway, we don't need all those protections anymore. Do we?
So not pulling out of the ECHR, but overriding elements of it?
I think that is the suggestion, one of the suggestions the Prime Minister made. I think he's right.
Has that been done anywhere else?
I think he is right to think about every courts once again blocking us from doing the things that we need to do in order to get people leaving the country. So
these are English courts blocking you for safety reasons.
They are a mix of various international agreements, some of which are very, very old, some of which go back to 1951, 1967, and so on and so forth.
That we've signed up to.
And we signed up to them.
Some of them we even wrote.
And some of them we even wrote. And when we wrote them, there was no sense for the people signing them that they would in future be used in the way that they are now used every day.
Exactly. It was a different time. If people want to live here, then they should follow our rules, whatever they are at the time. Don't worry though, Jonathan Pughface Gullis has an answer.
To disapply those treaties and conventions, as well as disapplying the Human Rights Act, to make sure we can take back control of our laws and our borders and not have these lefty human rights do-gooder lawyers get in the way of delivering.
A stupid answer. Leaving all those international treaties means not only that we don't have any protections, but also that international companies won't be particularly keen on investing in us. But never mind, let's just say that we have the legislation, we put it through, it gets ticked off by the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and then the UK courts and lawyers don't spot any gaps you could fly a helicopter through, and then Strasbourg decide to let it go, and then the UNHCR and all those other legal bodies just look the other way. Then we finally get the flights ready in order to fly refugees out to Rwanda, all about 200 of them, which equates to 0.1% of the current backlog. Well,
one step at a time, one step at a time.
So why are the government doing this?
We will finalise the treaty in light of today's judgment and ratify it without delay. But we need to end the merry-go-round.
And with the government's popularity sliding down and huge swings to Labour in by-elections, you can see why Sunak's not a fan of the playground. Or playtime, which is over. The Tories are putting in some emergency legislation, which is said to be only to be implemented when serious conditions arise. So what are the serious conditions that mean this has to be shoved through?
Do you lose your seat if you don't stop the boats?
I personally think it would be detrimental to me, yes, and I would potentially lose my seat if we don't stop the boats.
Yeah, 1 year to a general election when 350 Tories will hopefully be making a lifestyle choice. In other news, the Liberal Democrats' Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Layla Moran, got up in the House of Commons to give some sad news.
But ahead of the votes that we are going to take in a moment, I wanted to let the House know that today I lost my first family member. Today, I wanted to vote for peace. I wanted to be voting for a two-state solution because that's the only way that these horrors will never be seen again. I urge colleagues from all sides to bear in mind that this is more than just party politics right now. I have been so disappointed by language I have heard today. The Prime Minister earlier suggesting that we weren't on the side of Israel.
Order, please. Deepest condolences, I'm sure, from the House, but this is clearly not a matter for the Chair. So we'll let the comments that you've made stand. Thank you. No, please resume your seat. This is not a matter for the Chair.
To interrupt her like that was shocking, but it was not a point of order, and it's important that in House of Commons procedure is adhered to, so that there is time given to the important stuff, like this.
If I were to say, hey Siri, can I have GB News Radio, or Alexa, play GB News Radio. How can of course I'd say GB News Radio. It's the most successful news channel now, pulling in a bigger audience, I might say, Mr. Speaker, at most times of the day than either the BBC News Channel or Sky, and talk radio can't even be measured. Anyway.
I would imagine Siri would say, if I had hands, I would rip that ridiculous hairpiece off your head and then shove it up an orifice before shoving it down another. That was Michael Fabricant angling for a slot on GB News Radio. Sorry, slightly off topic. You can't have missed this, and I don't think I'm breaking any confidences to say he's wearing a wig. But it's getting longer. How is that possible? Is it hibernating? Does it need to be sheared or culled? And that's it. No time to talk about last Thursday's episode, where I called Steve Barclay the continuity candidate when he took over from Therese Coffey as the Environment Secretary. But even I, when I made that statement, didn't realise how flawlessly he would adapt to the example that she set.
I'm here in Isha, and this is a storm overflow system. It's been in full flow for over 7 hours today, and this water has sewage in it. We need to hold the water companies to account and the government who have let them get away with it.
And things are potentially a bit awkward for Steve, as one of the executives at Angling Water who are being investigated for illegal dumping of sewage in the rivers is his wife. Thankfully, there is no conflict of interest, as they both couldn't care less how much crap gets bumped into the rivers. Oh, and the woman that replaced him, Victoria Atkins, has a sugar daddy, or at least husband. He owns ABF Sugar and the largest legal cannabis farm in the UK. It's all falling into place. So the next time you see some batshit policy coming out of number 10, you can quite literally say, what are they smoking? No time to talk about the continuing high energy bills which are being felt by people up and down the country, and none more so than your local leisure centre, where some 40% are going to close without help. Now, I know the Tories won't really give a crap about this, but for entirely selfish reasons, I would have thought that the government would have stepped in. After all, about 350 MPs, fingers crossed, will need somewhere to hang out after the next election. And besides, where else are they going to swim? No time to talk about the SNP's health minister racking up an £11,000 data bill charge on his parliamentary iPad during a week-long holiday in Morocco. At the time, he claimed that it was because some SIM card hadn't been switched over and that only he had been using it. It then transpired that in fact his teenage sons had been using it to watch, you're on, football, in particular the Celtic matches. You know, it would have actually been cheaper to go and watch Celtic. A season ticket for the family would have been a tenth of that. Honestly, this has to be the worst piece of financial irregularity involving the SNP ever, right? But the people that have really looked bad on all this is the data provider, which is EE. I presume that's a noise you make when you get the bill. £7,000 for a single day? Obviously, Brexit has seen these companies charge whatever the hell they want, rather than being regulated. And Scotland actually voted to stay in the EU. You know, the SNP should probably mention that a bit more. And finally, the situation in Gaza is still as heartbreakingly horrible as possible. So a few things to consider. The vote on a ceasefire, let's be honest, was pointless. I'm not saying that's why the SNP put it forward, but they must have known it would be defeated, which it was by 125 to 294. Has to be said that even if it had passed, then the Israeli government were unlikely to change their murdering strategy. But it would have been nice in the face of the green light they're getting from the US and the EU to show some global Britishness and ask for a stop in the killing. Jeremy Corbyn's gotcha interview showed what a good man would do, but depressingly just played into the narrative that he would drop his trousers and bend over if Hamas asked him to, which is clearly nonsense.
Can we have a discussion?
Can you call them a terror group, Jeremy?
Can we have a discussion?
Can you call them a terror group?
Is it possible to have a rational discussion?
Are you prepared to call Hamas a terror group?
Is it possible to have a rational discussion with you? Is it possible? Come on, answer that question.
You can't, can you?
You answer it.
No, it's my show. You answer my question. Well, are Hamas a terror group?
Listen.
This was just a red top interviewer using gotcha questions and attempting to reduce everything to headline grabbing clickbait. But Pierce was so desperate to get an answer. So let's make it a factual one. The Cambridge Dictionary defines terrorist as someone who uses violent action or threats of violent action for political purposes. Pretty sure you can slot Hamas into that description. They murdered nearly 1,500 people, including children, and have kidnapped several hundred more. You know who else can be included in that description? The Israeli government, who have moved Palestinians out of their home for decades, who threatened and on occasion killed international journalists, and are in the process of committing any number of war crimes at this very moment. So, bandying the terrorist label around might make you look tough, but it doesn't solve the situation over there. In fact, if anything, it makes it harder because, and you can get as mad as you like about this next statement, but if you want a lasting peace, you will need to bring the Israeli government to the table. But you're also going to need to bring Hamas and the PLO, and calling them terrorists makes it harder to do so. And that's what this man was saying, and he's right. All it is a question of seeing how long it takes those in charge to toughen up and say the same thing. But don't hold your breath. And frankly, this from Starmer is just plain to the gallery petulant.
He won't stand as a Labour MP at the next election or any election. His days
ever again.
His days as a Labour MP are over.
What did you think?
We are a changed party.
But Corbyn was staggeringly naive to just go walking onto Piers Morgan's show and not know that a serious discussion is not why they asked him on. This was, and job done as far as they're concerned. If you want to see how this should have been handled, Owen Jones went on a few days later. Yes, sometimes he gives off the air of a socialist worker selling art student, but he was bang on the money on this.
15,000 people have now been killed now by the Israelis, estimate, in Gaza. 1 in every 200 people in Gaza have now been killed. If you were to adjust for population in Ukraine, that would be 300,000 Ukrainian civilians. 10,000 civilians have been killed since February last year. How can it be that you call that genocide, but when you have nearly half the entire civilian death toll of the Bosnian War in a country which is twice the size in terms of population. Why isn't that genocide?
But the one thing it did, beyond anything, without doubt, is it showed the readiness of a good number of Labour MPs to do the right thing. 56 voting with the SNP. It is just over a quarter, but a sizable amount, certainly. And as for Starmer, I genuinely believe he's a good man. But, and I certainly don't mean this as a compliment when I say he's an even better politician. And people can disagree with me on this and say Starmer's just a red Tory, but Starmer and Corbyn really just showed the difference between the politics of power and the politics of protest. Thank you all so much for watching. A quick note, this is the last Interesting Times on a Sunday I will be doing until the end of the year. There will be one more this coming Wednesday. I have attempted to get viewing numbers up, and although I haven't got to exactly where I'd like to be. So it's going back to the real world for a few weeks to work for real money. I may be producing a Christmas Interesting Times. I will be producing a New Year's Interesting Times, and then starting again mid-January. And by the way, for all those that do sponsor me, thank you. And as I'm not producing content for a few weeks, I would completely understand if you decide to take a month's break. Thank you all, and hoping you have a relatively stress-free Christmas. Take care.